I used to believe that loyalty between friends was stronger than almost anything else in the world, stronger even in family sometimes. Because unlike family, friendship was a choice, a promise made willingly, built slowly through shared memories and silent understanding. And for most of my life, I believed that promise with my whole heart, especially when it came to one person, the girl who had once been closer to me than anyone else in the world, a girl named Lila, the person I trusted more than my own reflection, the person who eventually destroyed that trust in a way I never thought possible. We met during our first year at university, in a crowded lecture hall that smelled faintly of old paper, coffee, and rain-soaked coats, the kind of place where hundreds of strangers sit shoulder to shoulder pretending not to notice each other, while secretly hoping to find someone who might make the overwhelming chaos of a new life feel manageable. I remember that morning clearly because I had arrived early, clutching a notebook that still smelled like fresh ink, feeling like I had accidentally walked into a world where everyone else already knew how to belong except me. Lila had slid into the empty seat beside me with a kind of casual confidence that immediately made people feel comfortable, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her eyes bright with curiosity as she glanced at my notebook and smiled like we had known each other forever. "You look like you're preparing for war," she joked softly, nodding toward my color-coded notes. I laughed awkwardly, embarrassed, but relieved someone had spoken to me, and that was the moment everything started. From that day forward, we became inseparable in a way that only young friendships can be, spending hours studying together in quiet corners of the library where sunlight filtered through tall windows and dust floated lazily in the air, sharing cheap takeout meals in my tiny apartment while complaining about professors, relationships, and a confusing mess of adulthood that seemed to be approaching faster than either of us expected. Lila had a way of making people feel important, like their stories mattered, and I admired that about her. She listened carefully, remembered little details about people's lives, and somehow always knew the right thing to say when someone needed encouragement. When I struggled with self-doubt during exams, she would stay up with me until 3 a.m, quizzing me patiently while we drank too much coffee and laughed about ridiculous things just to stay awake. When she had problems with her family back home, I was the one who listened to her late-night phone calls, hearing the strain in her voice as she described the pressure they placed on her to succeed, to become someone extraordinary. At the time, it felt like our friendship was perfectly balanced, each of us supporting the other through different storms. What I didn't realize back then was that some storms are created deliberately by the very people who pretend to protect you from them. By our second year at university, Lila and I had built a small social circle around us, a group of classmates who gathered regularly in the student cafe where the smell of espresso and cinnamon pastries hung permanently in the air. Among them was Daniel, a quiet but thoughtful guy who studied computer science and had a habit of observing conversations carefully before speaking. He and I developed a slow friendship that gradually deepened into something more, though neither of us rushed it. Lila seemed thrilled when she realized we liked each other, teasing me constantly and insisting she had predicted it long before I admitted it to myself. "You two are painfully obvious," she laughed one evening as we sat together in the cafe, rain tapping gently against the windows. At the time, I believed she was genuinely happy for us, and maybe part of her truly was. But looking back now, I wonder if that moment was a first crack in something darker hidden beneath the surface of our friendship. Over the next year, my life slowly began to stabilize in ways it never had before. My grades improved, my relationship with Daniel became serious, and I even secured an internship with a small marketing firm downtown, a place that smelled constantly of printer ink and fresh paint, but offered real opportunities for growth. Lila, however, seemed to be struggling more than she admitted. She jumped between classes, complained frequently about professors who didn't understand her potential, and often arrived late to our study sessions looking exhausted and frustrated. Whenever I asked if she was okay, she brushed it off with a smile and changed the subject. At the time, I assumed she simply needed space, the way everyone sometimes does when life becomes overwhelming. What I didn't see was how her frustration was slowly turning into resentment, and how that resentment was quietly beginning to focus on me. The first sign that something was wrong came in such a small, subtle way that I almost ignored it completely. One afternoon, I walked into the marketing office where I worked part-time and noticed my supervisor looking at me strangely, as if he was trying to decide whether he trusted me. Later that day, he asked to speak with me privately, closing the door of his office while home computers continued outside in the open workspace. "I received an email this morning," he said carefully, folding his hands on the desk. "Someone claiming to be a fellow student of yours suggested that some of the campaign ideas you submitted might not actually be your own work." The accusation hit me like ice water. I had spent weeks developing those ideas, staying late at the office refining them, and hearing someone question my honesty felt both humiliating and confusing. My supervisor eventually dismissed the message as anonymous gossip, but the damage lingered in the way people looked at me afterward, their smiles slightly more cautious than before. When I told Lila about it that evening, she reacted exactly the way a best friend should have, outraged on my behalf, promising that whoever sent the message must be jealous of my success. "People hate seeing others succeed," she said firmly, "especially when they feel left behind." I believe her completely. I didn't notice the brief flicker of something unreadable in her expression before she hugged me. Over the following months, small incidents continued to appear like cracks in glass, subtle enough to ignore individually, but disturbing when viewed together. Rumors about me began circulating among classmates, strange stories suggesting I had manipulated professors for better grades or used connections to secure my internship. None of it made sense. And whenever I confronted people about where they heard such things, the answers were always vague. Someone mentioned it. They would say, "I don't remember who." Lila always comforted me afterward, always insisted that jealous classmates were probably spreading lies. She even offered to defend me if she heard anyone repeating those rumors. The more chaos grew around me, the more grateful I felt for her loyalty. What I didn't realize was that the person planting those rumors had been sitting beside me the entire time, listening carefully to every fear I shared, collecting information that could later be twisted into something damaging. The truth finally began to surface on a cold evening in late November, when the campus was nearly empty and the wind carried the sharp scent of winter through the streets. I had stayed late at the library preparing a presentation for my internship when my phone buzzed with a message from someone I barely knew, a girl from one of Lila's classes named Hannah. Her text was brief but unsettling. "Hey, I don't know if this is my place, but I think you should see something." Attached was a screenshot of a group chat conversation I had never seen before. At first, the names meant nothing to me. Then my eyes landed on one message that made my heart stop. It was from Lila, and it was about me. The moment I saw Lila's message on that group chat screenshot, a cold, creeping feeling wrapped itself around my chest, tightening with every word I read. She wasn't just joking or venting about a minor annoyance. She'd been deliberately spreading lies about me, twisting the smallest details I'd shared in confidence into damaging accusations. My stomach churned as I scrolled to the conversation. Classmates I barely knew were laughing at distortions of my life, my achievements mocked, and worst of all, my private moments, things I'd only ever shared with her, were being weaponized to make me look petty, insecure, and dishonest. Each line of the chat felt like a punch in the gut, and I realized with a sickening clarity that the person I had trusted more than anyone else was orchestrating all of this. Lila, my so-called best friend, had been building a web of deception around me for months, hiding behind a mask of loyalty while feeding a growing narrative of lies that could ruin my reputation permanently. I felt a surge of anger so intense it nearly made me drop my phone. I wanted to confront her immediately, to scream, to demand an explanation, but a part of me knew that raw emotion could be dangerous. It could tip her off, and I needed clarity first, proof, something undeniable. The rest of that night I spent obsessively piecing together every interaction, every suspicious comment, every subtle hint I had ignored, and suddenly the puzzle made a terrifyingly coherent picture. The rumors of my internship, the strange looks from classmates, the sudden misunderstandings in group projects, they were all part of her plan. Every time I confided in her, every secret, every insecurity, had been carefully documented and twisted to manipulate others against me. My thoughts swirled with disbelief. How could someone I had loved like a sister betray me so completely? I had spent years offering my loyalty without hesitation, defending her when people questioned her motives or criticized her, and this was how she repaid me. But amid the shock and anger, a new emotion began to form: determination. I would not let this stand. I would not allow someone who claimed to be my friend to destroy my life without consequence. Over the next few days, I started quietly gathering evidence. I revisited messages, copied screenshots, cross-checked timelines, and recorded subtle inconsistencies in her stories. Each piece of evidence felt like reclaiming a part of myself, a way to prove that my instincts had been right all along. I also observed her behavior closely, noticing patterns I had once overlooked. The way she smiled a fraction too widely when a rumor about me surfaced, the careful deflection when conversations turned toward me, and the little smirks she shared with those classmates she had manipulated into believing her lies. The more I saw, the more meticulous and calculated her deception appeared. It wasn't just petty jealousy. It was strategy, a deliberate attempt to isolate me socially and professionally. I had to be careful. Confrontation at the wrong time could destroy the opportunity to expose her completely. I started looking for allies discreetly. Friends who had noticed inconsistencies, people who had been subtly manipulated into believing her but might reconsider if presented with the full truth. Among them, Hannah proved invaluable. She had initially sent me the first screenshot, and she quietly confirmed other messages and posts that had been shared in secret groups, some private, some semi-public. With Hannah's help, I mapped out a timeline of Lila's lies, linking them to every incident that had cast doubt on me over the last several months. Each revelation was more painful than the last, but it strengthened my resolve. Meanwhile, Lila continued her charade publicly, laughing and joking with me as if nothing had happened, asking about my internship, feigning concern over my stress levels, all while planning her next subtle attack. It was surreal, being betrayed by someone so close, seeing her maintain her innocence flawlessly, smiling in the sunlight while plotting in shadows. I started planning carefully. The exposure had to be complete, irrefutable, and public enough that those who had been manipulated would witness the truth firsthand. It couldn't be personal revenge. It had to be justice, a demonstration of her lies so clear that she could not deny them. I began crafting a plan to compile all evidence into one comprehensive record, including screenshots, timestamps, and context, organizing everything in a way that would tell the story chronologically and make it impossible to argue against. Each detail mattered. Every sarcastic remark she made about me in private chats, every altered version of my words she shared, and every subtle nudge she gave others to encourage gossip. As I prepared, I felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. I would have to confront her eventually, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. Lila was clever, manipulative, and persuasive, able to twist perceptions of reality with a practiced ease that I had only recently begun to understand. But I had learned her patterns, her methods, and most importantly, I had learned not to underestimate the power of evidence and truth. One evening, after gathering nearly every piece of proof I could find, I decided it was time to test the waters. I sent an anonymous message to one of our mutual friends, someone who had been quietly watching Lila's behavior but unsure what to believe. The message contained a single screenshot with a note. Look closely. There's more behind the smiles than you realize. Within hours, I received a reply. Astonishment, disbelief, and a cautious willingness to listen. It was a first small victory, proof that the truth could reach people if delivered carefully. I knew that once the dominoes started falling, there would be no turning back. Lila's carefully constructed facade would crack under scrutiny, and I would witness her unraveling in real time. At the same time, I had to remain composed. This wasn't about rage. It was about methodical exposure. Allow her lies to collapse naturally, so that every person who had been deceived would understand not only the betrayal, but the meticulous planning behind it. By the end of that week, I had compiled an entire dossier of evidence, organized into categories, dates, and specific incidents, detailing Lila's manipulation and lies in a way that was impossible to dismiss. I reviewed it obsessively, imagining how she would react when confronted, imagining the shock on the faces of those who had trusted her, and imagining the relief of those who had quietly suspected but had lacked proof. The weight of months of betrayal pressed on me, but beneath it, a sense of empowerment began to grow. I had been the victim for too long, but now I held the key to truth, and with it, the chance to reclaim not just my reputation, but my peace of mind. That night, as the city lights flickered outside my window and the wind rattled the trees, I sent a final message to Hannah and a few other carefully chosen allies. Tomorrow, it all comes out. No more hiding. No more lies. I closed my laptop, heart pounding, and realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Not for Lila, not for me, and not for anyone who had been caught in the web of deceit she had spun so effortlessly. I had crossed a line from suspicion to action, and there was no turning back. The first move in exposing her lies was complete, and the real reckoning was only just beginning. The morning after sending the warning messages, the campus felt heavier, almost oppressive, as if the air itself anticipated the coming storm. I walked through the halls with a calculated calm, yet my stomach churned with nerves. Every glance from classmates felt like a question mark. Every whisper a potential confirmation that the web of lies was beginning to unravel. I had organized a small, discreet gathering with a few mutual friends who had begun to sense Lila's duplicity, but had lacked proof. The cafe we chose was tucked away on a quiet street, its rustic brick walls and faint smell of roasted coffee beans creating a strangely intimate atmosphere for what was about to unfold. I arrived early, placing a dossier on the table in front of me, each printout carefully labeled and organized, every screenshot and message time-stamped and annotated. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the pages, but my mind remained sharp, replaying every detail, every piece of evidence, every subtle pattern that had revealed her manipulation over the months. Soon, the group arrived, each person casting cautious glances at the dossier. They had no idea that what they were about to see would shock them, unraveling not just Lila's carefully curated facade, but the illusion of trust she had cultivated so perfectly. I began presenting the evidence slowly, narrating the story with deliberate precision, showing how each lie had been seeded, how private conversations had been distorted, and how classmates had been unwittingly pulled into her scheme. Faces shifted from confusion to disbelief, some pale, some tightening with anger, some shaking their heads as if refusing to accept the truth. I could feel the tension thickening in the room, a tangible force pressing against my chest as everyone absorbed the reality of what Lila had done. And then, inevitably, came a moment when Lila herself walked in. She entered casually, as if she had no idea what was happening. Her smile bright, her posture relaxed, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me. My heart thudded, and a strange mixture of dread and determination coursed through me. "Hey, everyone," she said cheerfully, sliding into a seat beside one of our mutual friends, completely unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the storm brewing around her. I watched her for a moment, noting the subtle flicker of recognition in her eyes as she glanced at the dossier on the table, before turning my attention back to the group. "There's something I need everyone to see," I said, my voice steady but cold, and I began walking them to the organized files, each screenshot, each chat, each message dissected and laid bare. Lila's expression changed almost imperceptibly at first, a slight narrowing of her eyes, a faint tightening of her jaw, but she maintained her composure. When I finally reached the part where she had spread false rumors about my internship, her laughter faltered, a brief, almost imperceptible hitch in her tone. "Wait," she said, her voice a touch sharper now. What is this?" I turned to her, meeting her gaze directly. No room for excuses or deflection. "It's the truth, Lila. Every lie, every manipulation, every secret you turn against me. It's all here." The room went silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on everyone. Some of our friends shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to confront her, unsure whether to speak at all. Lila's carefully constructed calm began to crack. I could see it in the way she tapped her fingers against the table, in the slight tremor of her lips, in the flash of panic that crossed her eyes before she forced a composed smile. "You don't understand," she started, trying to weave a narrative, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt at control. I didn't mean it like that. It was just joking. You're overreacting." I shook my head, letting the dossier fall open for everyone to see. Pages spread across the table like a map of betrayal. "This isn't a joke, Lila. This is months of lies, manipulation, and deception. You've hurt everyone here, and for what? Jealousy? Envy? Control?" Her shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of exposure settling over her. For the first time, I saw not the confident, charming girl I had once admired, but a fragile, defensive person cornered by her own actions. Her attempts to redirect blame or charm our friends evaporated as they began to voice their disbelief, recounting times when they had doubted her explanations, times when her stories didn't add up, times when her behavior had made them uncomfortable. Lila faltered, words failing her, stammering in ways I had never witnessed. The reality I had feared but also hoped for was happening. The truth was seeping in, unraveling the lies that had been spun so meticulously. I realized that my meticulous documentation, combined with the silent observations of others who had begun questioning her, had created an undeniable narrative. She couldn't charm her way out anymore. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. I felt my pulse quicken, my chest tight, as I delivered the final pieces of evidence. Screenshots of private conversations where she had plotted, manipulated, and orchestrated rumors, conversations that had intentionally targeted my friendships, my reputation, and even my sense of self. Lila's eyes darted around, realizing that every friend who had once trusted her now had proof of her duplicity. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and I saw the faint quiver in her hands as she finally admitted what everyone had suspected. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I wanted people to notice me, to... Her voice broke off, unable to complete the sentence, her excuses collapsing under the weight of evidence and collective realization. For a long moment, the cafe was silent except for the quiet hum of the espresso machine and the occasional clink of cups, an almost surreal contrast to the emotional tension filling the room. Then, slowly, one by one, our friends began to speak, their voices measured but firm, confronting her, questioning her choices, and expressing the hurt her actions had caused. Lila tried to interject, but her words were drowned out by the chorus of disappointment and betrayal. I watched her crumble, realizing that justice in this moment wasn't about punishment. It was about the clarity of truth, the exposure, deception, and the reclamation of trust among those who had been affected. That day marked a turning point. I had confronted the betrayal not with anger alone, but with evidence, precision, and the support of those who had once been caught in her web. Lila left the cafe defeated, not screaming or pleading, but silent, carrying with her the weight of her choices, and the realization that she could no longer manipulate reality for her own gain. I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow, the bitter taste of knowing that someone I had once loved and trusted had been capable of such calculated betrayal. But more than that, I felt empowerment. The storm had passed, and though the aftermath would take time to heal, the truth had prevailed, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of deception pressing on my chest. After that tense confrontation at the cafe, the days that followed were like stepping into a storm-swept city where every familiar street suddenly felt alien. Lila's absence was noticeable almost immediately. She no longer attended group study sessions. She didn't respond to messages, and the subtle glances she used to throw my way were replaced by complete avoidance. The ripple effect of her exposure was evident everywhere. Classmates who had once sided with her now approached me cautiously, some with apologies, others with sheepish acknowledgement of how easily they had been misled. Even professors who had been indirectly influenced by her rumors began to treat me with renewed respect, their previous doubts now replaced with understanding, as if the truth had cleared a fog that had been lingering over my reputation for months. I noticed subtle shifts in the atmosphere during lectures and social gatherings. Where there had been suspicion and whispers, there was now a cautious camaraderie, a silent acknowledgement of my vindication. But alongside this relief, there was a lingering bitterness, a subtle ache from the realization that someone I had once loved and trusted could betray so deeply. I had to navigate these emotions carefully, allowing myself to feel the hurt and disappointment without letting them consume me, and I began to focus on reclaiming my life, one decision at a time. Socially, Lila's isolation was palpable. Word had spread about her manipulations, and even those who had previously admired her charisma were now wary, often exchanging knowing looks when she attempted to interact with others. The very skill she had relied on to charm and deceive had become her undoing, as people who had once trusted her began to question every motive, every statement. It was a slow, inevitable social unraveling, and I watched it unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow, recognizing that justice could be subtle yet profound. Professionally, My internship and campus relationships began to stabilize as colleagues and classmates alike recognized not only my abilities, but also my integrity. Opportunities that had once been overshadowed by rumors started opening up again. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of control over my own life. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what had been unfairly threatened. Emotionally, I found myself slowly healing, not because the betrayal had lost its sting, but because I had faced it directly, confronted the lies, and stood firm in my own truth. There were moments of lingering doubt, brief pangs of anger when I recalled the subtleties of her manipulation, but each time, I reminded myself of the power of evidence, clarity, and support. I began journaling, not just to process events, but to examine patterns in my own behavior, to learn how trust could be discerned more carefully in the future, and to understand the complex motivations that might drive someone like Lila to deceive so completely. Hannah and the few allies who had supported me became central figures in this recovery process, offering perspective, encouragement, and a quiet reminder that I was not alone in recognizing what had happened. Together, we reflected on the lessons learned, acknowledging both the betrayal and the strength required to confront it, to navigate the tangled emotions, and to ultimately emerge more self-assured. Lila, of course, reacted in her own way behind the scenes. While she did not attempt to reconcile publicly, I later learned through subtle campus chatter and indirect channels that she had tried to mend some of the social fractures she had caused, though her efforts were largely met with skepticism. People were reluctant to trust her, and the credibility she had once wielded so effortlessly had been permanently diminished. The consequences were a reminder that actions, especially calculated betrayals, have a long-lasting impact beyond immediate exposure. Despite the initial tension and public scrutiny, I chose not to escalate further. My goal had never been public humiliation. It had been the restoration of truth, the protection of my integrity, and the prevention of future harm. Watching Lila navigate the aftermath without attempting further deception became a silent affirmation that justice, when approached methodically and calmly, could achieve more than impulsive retaliation ever could. As weeks turned into months, I continued to rebuild, reconnecting with classmates, strengthening friendships, and pursuing opportunities with renewed focus. I joined new projects, met new people, and even found moments of laughter that had been scarce during the months of uncertainty. My confidence, once undermined by whispers and deception, grew steadily, grounded in the knowledge that I had faced betrayal, confronted it with evidence, and emerged with my dignity intact. The emotional growth was perhaps the most profound outcome. I became more discerning, more cautious with trust, but also more resilient, understanding that while betrayal could wound deeply, it could also catalyze self-awareness, clarity, and empowerment. Lila's absence from my life, though painful, created space for authenticity, and I embraced the freedom to focus on genuine relationships and personal development. And yet, even amidst recovery and progress, I occasionally felt a pang of sorrow, a reminder of the loss of what I had once thought was unbreakable friendship. It was a subtle ache, tempered by understanding that some people are capable of causing harm despite the depth of connection you believe exists. That realization became a cornerstone of my personal growth, recognizing human complexity, acknowledging vulnerability, and learning to navigate relationships with both empathy and caution. Ultimately, the exposure of Lila's lies was not just a story of betrayal. It became a story of survival, of reclaiming identity, of demonstrating that truth, patience, and careful action can dismantle even the most calculated deceit. I emerged not only vindicated, but wiser, stronger, and more attuned to the subtle dynamics of trust, manipulation, and integrity. It was a long, sometimes painful journey, but it reinforced the truth I would carry forward, that betrayal, when faced directly and with clarity, can illuminate resilience, reveal inner strength, and foster profound personal growth, leaving scars not as marks of defeat, but as reminders of survival and empowerment. The weeks following Lila's social isolation had given me time to rebuild, to process the layers of betrayal, and to regain my confidence. But the story was not yet complete. I knew that the final step had to be public, undeniable, a reckoning that would leave no room for doubt about what had happened. I began crafting a presentation that would bring everything to light, a digital compilation of all the screenshots, messages, chat logs, and timelines I had meticulously collected, organized into a narrative that even the most skeptical onlooker could follow. Every detail mattered. The subtleties of manipulation, the intentional distortions of my words, the calculated encouragement of gossip among classmates. I included timestamps, locations, and contextual notes, showing the full pattern of deceit, and I rehearsed the way I would present it, careful to maintain calm authority rather than anger or spite. The moment came during a campus event that had drawn a large number of students, a lecture hall packed with faces that had once been skeptical, curious, or unwittingly misled. I stood at the front, laptop connected to projector, the dossier projected onto the large screen behind me, the hum of anticipation buzzing in the air. Lila was in the back of the room, her usual confident demeanor faltering as she caught sight of the presentation title on the screen, The Truth About Betrayal, Evidence of Deception and Lies. I began slowly, narrating each incident, showing screenshots, reading excerpts of messages that clearly revealed manipulation, and highlighting the discrepancies between her public persona and her private actions. The room was silent. The only sound a faint scribble of notes and the occasional intake of breath from those who had been blindsided by the depth of deceit. Lila's eyes widened, and I could see her pulse quicken, the facade of composure cracking visibly. She tried to speak, to interrupt, to charm the narrative, but I ignored her, letting the evidence speak for itself. Each revelation landed like a precise strike, cutting through the web she had spun so carefully. Friends who had once doubted my story now leaned forward, confirming details, recounting conversations, and nodding in acknowledgement. Even those who had been manipulated themselves began to express astonishment, realizing the extent of her orchestration. I could feel the emotional weight of the room shift, from disbelief to outrage to a collective recognition of truth. Lila tried to retreat, whispering to classmates and attempting feeble explanations, but the comprehensive evidence rendered every excuse meaningless. I watched as her confidence crumbled under the weight of reality, her reputation unraveling in front of everyone, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, and unable to manipulate a single perception. And in that moment, I felt not satisfaction born of revenge, but a profound sense of closure. The betrayal that had once threatened to consume me had been dismantled piece by piece, and the truth now stood in full, undeniable clarity. After the presentation, I addressed the room with steady calm, speaking not only of the deception but of the lessons learned, the importance of discernment, the necessity of careful observation, and the resilience required to confront betrayal without letting it destroy one's sense of self. The words flowed from me naturally, strengthened by months of preparation, reflection, and emotional growth. Lila left the room silently, the weight of exposure following her, while whispers and conversations buzzed in the lecture hall, confirming that the narrative had been fully received. In the days and weeks that followed, my relationships with classmates, colleagues, and friends strengthened, built now on the foundation of transparency, trust, and mutual respect. The scars of betrayal remained, subtle reminders of the pain endured, but they were no longer wounds that festered. They were markers of growth, resilience, and survival. I felt a renewed sense of empowerment, the knowledge that I had faced deception head-on, relied on evidence rather than emotion alone, and emerged with my integrity intact. And yet, amidst the vindication and the restored peace, I felt a quiet sadness of what had been lost. The friendship that once felt unbreakable, now irreparably shattered. I allowed myself to grieve, acknowledging that trust, once broken, cannot always be mended, and that some relationships, no matter how deep, may end not in reconciliation but in the clarity of truth. Ultimately, the story of betrayal, exposure, and recovery became more than a tale of personal vindication. It became a story of resilience, careful strategy, and emotional growth. I had learned to navigate the complexities of human relationships, to recognize deception, to confront lies with precision, and to reclaim both my voice and my dignity. Walking across campus in the weeks after the exposure, I noticed the subtle changes, the respectful nods from peers, the quiet acknowledgement from professors, the laughter and collaboration in group projects once more tinged with genuine trust. Life had not only returned to normal, it had improved, reshaped by the trials I had endured and the clarity I had achieved. And as for Lila, I never sought further confrontation, never attempted additional retribution, because the exposure itself had been sufficient. Her reputation, carefully built over years, had been dismantled, and the consequences of her choices would follow her in every interaction, every whisper, every evaluation of character. In the end, I emerged not only vindicated, but wiser, stronger, and more attuned to the subtle dynamics of trust, manipulation, and integrity. The betrayal had been painful, but the recovery had been transformative, leaving me with an unshakable understanding that truth, preparation, and resilience are the most powerful tools one can wield in the face of deception. The story closed not with revenge, but with empowerment, closure, and the quiet, enduring satisfaction of reclaiming one's life, one piece of truth at a time.